Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session of the 16th International Forum on Ecological Civilization, affectionately known as the Claremont Eco Forum, for its many years being held in Claremont, California. But it's a privilege to be able to do this online with all of you, all of our friends from around the world today. My name is Andrew Schwartz. I'm the director of the Center for Process Studies, the co-founder of the Institute for Ecological Civilization, and a professor of philosophy and religion in Claremont. And I am honored to be a part of the organizing team for this event, along with my other wonderful partners, Zhehe Wang, Meijun Fan, Jay McDaniel, Dongwu Li. So thank you all for your help in putting this together. But a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This session's being simultaneously translated into English and Chinese. So basically what you do is at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a button that says interpretation. And if you click that, there should be two options for you to choose. Pick your favorite language. And for all of our panelists, just talk normally. In one of those two languages is great. And then magically, some hidden translating angels in the background are going to convert all of your wonderful thoughts into another language for us. So actually, thank you to Wen and to Yuji, our wonderful translators for this work. So yes, be sure to click that button. And if you're hearing me speak in English and you don't want to be hearing me in English, you'll have to hit that button now. But how would you know to hit that button if nobody told you that in Chinese? So maybe do we need that? We could put the instructions written in the chat, and that solves that problem. So thank you to my friends for doing that. I've got a short little video to share with you that Meijun put together for introducing the forum. And then we have a special message and welcome from Dr. John Cobb, who did not realize he was going to be asked to just say welcome to everybody, but he's here, so we're going to make him work. But after the video. So here we go.
Welcome to the 16th Claremont International Forum on Ecological Civilization and the 5th Youth Forum on Ecological Civilization. The Claremont Eco Forum is a prestigious annual event that began in 2006. It stands as the earliest and largest forum dedicated to ecological civilization in the Western world. Our mission is to gather innovative academics, nonprofit leaders, prominent activists, and governmental officials from both China and other nations. Together, we aim to explore new worldviews, modes of thinking, developmental models, approaches to organic farming, and educational paradigms in the pursuit of transitioning towards an ecological civilization. Over the years, thousands of individuals from around the globe have participated in these forums, fostering a significant impact. Media's coverage, such as People's Daily, Xinhua News, International Daily, and Sino U.S. Times, has helped to disseminate the forum's objectives. Notably, the 15th Claremont Eco Forum in 2022 reached approximately 12 million views, particularly in China, through various traditional and social media channels. The Claremont Eco Forum was initially organized by the Institute for Postmodern Development of China, IPDC, and the Center for Process Studies, CPS. In recent years, it has gradually received co-sponsorship from esteemed organizations such as the Cobb Institute, CI, the Institute for Ecological Civilization, EcoCiv, the China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation, the Budapest Center for Long-Term Sustainability, Hungary, the Overseas Chinese Environmental Engineers and Scientists Association, and the Chinese Ecological Civilization, Research and Promotion Association. We extend a warm welcome to all participants and hope you thoroughly enjoy the forum. May the 16th Claremont Ecological Forum be a resounding success.
Wonderful. And here again are the instructions for simultaneous translation, in case you needed a reminder. But I think everybody's got that covered now. So with that, Dr. Cobb, would you like to say a few words to our international audience after we have you unmuted? There we go.
Okay, I had to do it. Well, usually I can't do it. Well, I decided if I was going to play an official role on this program, I better put on my Chinese dress jacket. It was given to me by Shehe so that I would look Chinese, but I haven't seen a single Chinese wear anything like it. So I consider myself very distinctive in China that I wear Chinese jacket. Welcome to all of you. And it's a delight to me that these are continuing. I think we missed 1 year, but that wasn't too bad. And it's this is the most international group of people assembled, I think, that we have ever had. So congratulations to the planners. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cobb. It's always wonderful to have a 98-year-old junior in the audience. So I'm glad you could be here. We've got a wonderful panel that's going to be exploring the main theme of our conference this year, which is a deep transformation toward ecological civilization. And our organizers, we've decided in thinking about deep transformation to think about it in a variety of different ways. Yesterday, we explored primarily transformation that is sort of inner transformation, transformation of our worldviews and our thoughts and our values, transformation of our spirit and psyche. So it was a transformation of self, right? In the role that plays in transforming the world and building an ecological civilization. And today's conversations, the conversation this morning and the one this evening, take a little bit of a different approach, expanding the conversation, looking at a deep transformation through systems change, through changing the very structures and the way that our human communities are organized, right? And it's of course connected to the inner transformation and transformation of self. It's connected to new paradigms and worldviews and values, but how they are exemplified in the sort of organizational structures of the way that our communities are built. And that's what we mean when we talk about an ecological civilization. We're redoing the way that human life is organized, our civilizations, and we're doing it in a way that's built on ecological values toward a more sustainable and equitable way of being together for the long-term well-being of people and the planet. So I'm excited for our panel today to continue that conversation. After their 90-minute discussion, we will then have a wonderful musical performance and interlude, followed by a short break, and then we'll gather back into small groups where each of you in our audience will have a chance to talk with each other in more depth about the ideas that are being explored here in this year's forum. So, with that, I'd like to introduce today's moderator. That's Dr. Sukhyun Park. She's actually an expert on rebuilding sustainable communities based in South Korea. She's the founder of the Sustainable Systems Research Institute, where she evaluates conservation programs and policies, analyzes ecosystem services from the perspective of social ecological systems, and as well as social aspects of environmental impact assessment based on stakeholder analysis. So she teaches sustainable development and environmental governance at Kyunghee Cyber University, specializes in environmental policy and research on sustainable development, socio-ecological systems, conflict management, is involved actively in city and local and national governance structures in Korea, and happens to be one of the leaders of the EcoCiv Korea program, which is a co-sponsor of this event. So, Dr. Park, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a very nice introduction of me. Welcome everyone to the second session of the second day of Claremont Eco Forum. It's a kind of real global discussion forum. And I was one of the panelists last year's forum, but today I'm delighted to be here again to moderate this session, joined by a group of well-known experts. You may be familiar with their names, but let me briefly introduce the panelists in alphabetic order, and I will leave some important part of their career for the panelists to talk themselves later in the discussion. Okay, first, Dr. Jonathan Dickstein, an assistant professor at Riane Academy who specializes in South Asian regions, region and ecology, and comparative religious ethics. He received his doctorate degree in religious studies from the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he wrote his dissertation on ancient Indian animal taxonomies and their relevance for religious ritual and dietary practice. And second, Dr. Riane Eisler. She is a system scientist, futurist, and lawyer. Wow. The president of the Center for Partnership Systems and editor-in-chief of the online interdisciplinary journal of partnership studies. She taught in many universities and published many books, including The Chalice and the Blade, and then The Real Wealth of Nation. And her newest work is published with the anthropologist Douglas Fry in 2019, titled as Nurturing Our Humanity. You just heard right before this session begins. And third one is Dr. Hiheon Kim, the senior pastor of Hanglin Church, president of the Society of Korean Minjung Theology, chairperson of the Peace and Reunification Committee of the Presbyterian Church of the Republic of Korea, and representative of the Hyosan Mi-sun Peace Park Project Committee. He received his PhD in philosophy of religion from Claremont, as you all know, and he published several books, including Minjung and Process, Philosophy of Seonamdong, Minjung Theology and Pantheism, translated 3 books concerning Whiteheadian process ideas into Korean, and co-authored about 20 books with theologians and activists. And last but not least, Dr. Wen Tiejun, a professor and executive dean of the Institute of Rural Reconstruction of China, Southwest University, and executive dean of the Institute of Rural Reconstruction of the Straits Fujian, Agriculture and Forestry University, China. His field of expertise is on social, economic, sustainable development and rural issues, especially in policy studies, macroeconomic geostrategy of South-South cooperatives, and long-term inclusive growth. As Executive Secretary General of Chinese Society for Restructuring the Economic System, he's leading China grassroots efforts to revive rural communities and economies. He published many books and articles, including his recent work, 10 Crises, the Political Economy of China's Development from 1949 to 2020, which was published in 2021. Wow. Well, we have great panelists today. I'm really honored to be moderating this session for their width and depth of the panelists' experience and thoughts. Since we only have 90 minutes to hear from the panelists, and I want to save time, and I better get started with the first question, which is how your expertise relates to today's topic, which is transforming our society. How how do you see social transformation is related to your work and your experience and what you've done so far? May I invite Jonathan first to join the first round of dialogue?
Sure. Can you hear me all right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So yes, I'm an assistant professor of Jain studies at Arihanta Academy. And this is Jainism is a religious tradition of South Asia, like some of you know, and it has a lot of kinships with earlier South Asian traditions, such as something like an early Hinduism and also an emergence of Buddhism. And what's refreshing, specifically from the Jain worldview, I could say that it has some resonances with themes and movements like deep ecology and concerns for biocentrism. Jainism is very much concerned with the ability of so many organisms to experience the world and sense their surroundings and have welfares of their own. And hence Jainism from its very inception was concerned with nonviolence, as many of you may be aware of, and the ways in which our individual actions impact not only other humans around us, but non-humans as well. And hence there's so much relevance for dietary practice in Jain traditions. And I think this has a lot of relevance moving forward, because while a lot of those traditions were focused on the individual's practice, we're now approaching 10 billion people on the planet by 2050 and global food production. How do we feed such a population? And I think Jainism itself needs to confront these problems in Jain communities, but also there's a lot to learn from the ways in which we can engage with our food and other sources of consumption that really might help scale back in ways that make for a sustainable future.
All right. Thanks. Then may I ask Hiheon to respond?
Did you ask me or who?
Hiheon? Yeah, Hiheon.
Yeah,
Is, oh,
I'm Hiheon. I'm Hiheon, having a long interest of social transformation. Currently, I'm working on Minjung theology, and that is a Korean form of liberation theology and Korean Peninsula reunification movement as a pastor. All of which I see as a part of a larger stream of ecological civilization. The movement for the justice and military disarmament is inseparable from the climate justice movement. Today, religious community in Korea are working toward ecological transition, but we feel very limited. And so I hope to learn from this dialogue. What I'm concerned is that ecological concern seems to be everywhere, but actually nowhere. The discourse of the climate crisis is very widespread, and climate action is very diverse. However, this immense diversity does not come together into a solid, transformative social force. Everything should be radically changed, but in fact, almost nothing happens. Very pessimistic appreciation of my idea. The social movement for liberation and equality have not been able to fully disentanglement themselves from the ideology, capitalistic ideology of more production for prosperity. So many social conflict happened in Korea, and the transformative forces have not yet aimed the same task for ecological civilization.
All right. Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
All right. How about Riane?
okay. Well, first of all, I want to say that I really love the theme of a different civilization. And what you are calling an ecological civilization really is, in my terms, a partnership civilization in which we humans recognize that we're part of nature, but that we are also interconnected with one another. And my work has been exactly identifying what are the primary components, not only of what holds us back, which we've inherited, but what do we need to build? So it's not just deconstruction, but really reconstruction. And the premise is that we have a systemic problem, and that you cannot, as I said to the United Nations General Assembly, when I spoke there years ago, you cannot just tack on a balance with nature, harmony with nature, to a fundamentally imbalanced system, that it really requires systemic change. Now, my work has gone very deep, much deeper than the conventional categories of right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, because frankly, we have inherited these categories and they fragment our consciousness. None of them really encompass the whole of society. In fact, if you think about them realistically, there have been terrible cultures in every one of our conventional categories. So none of them tell us what we have to build. Moreover, if you really look much more closely, you see that they marginalize or ignore the majority of humanity, women and children, and therefore also families. And to make a long story short, and I think I'll have the opportunity to get back to this, we know from
Recording in progress.
Beg your pardon?
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, we know from neuroscience that nothing less than how our brains develop, with it how we think, how we feel, how we act, and what our values are, and how we vote, are largely impacted by our cultural environments, that our brains develop in interaction with our environments. For humans, these are cultural, and they are mediated to a very large degree by families, but also by other institutions, education, religion, politics, economics. So what we have inherited, though, is a devaluation of caring for nature. I mean, just think about it. There's nothing in either socialism or capitalist theory about caring for nature. And yes, caring has been coded feminine, associated with women. So when you start taking this into account, you begin to connect the dots. And that's what this research, multidisciplinary, cross-cultural research is, that I've been conducting, and that other people and that our Center for Partnership Systems conducts, is about, is really looking at the whole system. So to make a long story short, yes, this conference is directly related to my work.
All right, thanks. Probably end of this discussion, you probably have to connecting those dots again. And Les and Professor Wen, could you tell us about your experience that relates to this topic?
好，谢谢主持人，也谢谢这个会议的主办方，邀请我来参加今天的论坛。先要表示一下歉意，就是我最近感染了新冠肺炎，不像以前那样，说话的声音会比较大， 现在呢就希望大家理解，我可能就是声音会弱一点。我们这个团队的各种实践和研究是分布在中国大陆各个地方的，所以我今天来参加会议，只是作为一个团队成员来向大家介绍我们在这个领域中所提出的研究观点。希望注意的是，我们这个团队的研究成果在中国大陆已经有300万册的销售量。我们关于中国的周期性经济危机和它的发展经验的归纳和总结，就不是说应该做什么，而是它实际做了什么。这个经验性的研究呢，这本书叫做《八次危机》，在中国大陆呢已经销售了80万册。学术性的著作能够得到社会广泛认可，还是很难的。我们的英文版的关于中国经验的解读叫做10次危机，英文就叫 10 Crisis， 是由这个Macmillan Paragraph 他们2021年出版的，并且呢获得了中国新发展奖，就是这是一个Springer Nature 他们这个出版集团颁发的一个奖项。因为我们关于中国的研究呢，应该说在中国国内已经形成了比较大的影响。我们对近期的研究呢，重点是关注叫做 Ecological and Global South， 就是全球的在地化或者地方化和这个全球南方。这一点呢，是在我们面临新的挑战面前所提出的一个思考。主要是认为无论霸权国家采取什么样的措施，都不可能解决全球化自身的内部危机，就是这个债务过重。大家可以看到，在全球化演变中，长期占据主导地位的美国，现在呢是世界第1大债务国。过去在全球化中，居于引领地位的日本和中国，现在也都变成了世界这个排在前3位的债务国。几乎所有的 G7 和这个大多数西方的这些所谓现代化国家，都成了高债务和高通胀的国家。这个世界形势的演变是不看你说什么，而往往是把最直接的那个后果放在我们的面前。所以按照以往的，所以人类追求现代化的这种 Global North， 就是全球北方的发展路径，首先是全球北方自己走不下去了。当然，在中国大陆内部也存在着北方和南方的矛盾斗争。所以我们现在看呢，应该说，当今天讨论生态文明的时候，它首先是全球化危机客观爆发，无法用原来的老的发展经验去应对所造成像这个叫做 Globalization， 就是这个全球的在地化 很大程度上呢是走向生态文明的第一个重要的步骤。那接着呢，我们来看大多数没有进入全球北方模式的现代化的南方国家，他们在生态化的多样性的在地的发展过程中，有着相对比较丰富的经验。所以我提醒大家，与其关注从这个西方中心主义的思想体系中所形成的各种论述，还不如更多的关注南方国家在可持续的生态化的发展过程中所形成的具体经验，这样我们的讨论呢就会更有实际作用。好，谢谢大家。
All right, thank you. Yeah, that's wonderful experiences that you shared. And I think your experiences somehow related to the social movement also. And then, for example, Jonathan mentioned about his work with for Jainism, and also which I guess Vegetarian movement is related to that. And then Hiheon's Minjung theology is also related to Christian social progressive movement. And Riane also works for the the women and children's rights movement, and then the Partnership Society. And also Dr. Wen works absolutely related to the local and rural communities, to new kind of development through globalization. And all these things are quite well fit into the social movement. And my second question is then, what are some key contemporary social movements that are driving transformation change toward the building an ecological civilization, and what kind of strategies they have during the social movement? And as you all mentioned about the various areas of social movement, it may related to the ecofeminism or extinction rebellion or veganism, animal liberation, whatsoever. And what are the key contemporary social movements that could transform our society to build ecological civilization? And who would like to jump in first? The one, Dr. Professor Wen, do you want to?
是这样啊。
Do you have a cup of water, just in case that your throats are thirsty or something? Yeah, hope you feel better with the water.
这个大家应该知道，在中国照搬西方的现代化模式，开始推进所谓激进现代化，我们叫做 radical modernization. So social movements, economic movements in China since 19th century. And there is another so-called alternative movements taking place in China since late 1990s. That is the rural reconstruction movement. And the rural reconstruction movements is not only concerning the rural issues, but also the urbanization and the industrialization. So since 1990s, late 1990s,
Hold a second. Do you speak in English right now? Professor Wen?
Okay, I can change back to Chinese.
It's okay. If you are comfortable with English, then you can speak in English then.
Okay, I suppose rural reconstruction movements in China is somehow not very familiar with these participants, so I changed to English. And if the modern issues nowadays, I think that most of research scholars easier to understand. So when they talk about the history, especially the modern history since 19th century. 能听到，你的翻译仍然是 OK.
All right.
Good.
All right. Okay. About the
我把翻译这个部分关了，好不好？或者是只是改成英文。用原始音频。OK, can I?
I'm sorry, I couldn't catch up when you speak in Chinese, so there's no translation in. Yeah, right. Sorry.
I just talked to the interpreter.
Oh, okay, I see.
I keep speaking English and she translates into Chinese.
All right, good.
Okay, so just now I talked about Wen China facing the challenge of the this imperialist country attack, and then China changed the traditional society into the modern society with the industrialization and urbanization. That is a so-called very radical modernization since the 1990s. But meanwhile, the same movements in China is such kind of alternative in name of rural reconstruction in local. A few outsiders, I mean the foreign researchers, pay attention to such kind of alternative movements in China. But indeed, since the beginning, when China adopt the path for the modernization like other Western countries, there is somehow the local movements initiated by the local people themselves, especially by these so-called social enterprises, entrepreneurs, and the alternative intellectuals. So since then, we have more than 100 years alternative movements in local, and mainly focus on the local sustainability, focus on the people's safety, and also the integration between rural and urban, not so radical, only develop these big cities, these big urban area. So such kind of movements in name of, not in name of alternative, but in name of different local name is more than 100 years. And so when the 1990s, especially when Soviet Union collapsed and other so-called socialist countries collapsed, at that time, the China collapse is the main stream. It's a kind of not only the slogan, but it's a kind of policies. Since the early 1990s, when China facing this big international and domestic crisis, and we reinitiate the rural reconstruction as a kind of social movements. So the practice and the different local have a different practices, especially when the whole of the 1990s at that time, China facing a lot of challenge, not only from the outside, but also from inside. So you may know that at that time, there's a 45 million state-owned enterprises workers layoff. And then large number of the rural people have a very low income, but got to pay high tax. So in the whole of the 1990s, there's a big challenge from the globalization. And then since then, the mainstream still keep going with the radical modernization, try to duplicate the globalization. But in the local, a lot of different local, we have initiated more and more the local people themselves, by themselves, with themselves, and then they reorganize. So we have so many different local, and then since that time, we are very much emphasize so-called 三农问题, means peasants, rural sustainability and the peasant right, rural sustainability, and agricultural safety. So since the late 1990s, the new rural reconstruction movements reinitiated. Until now, it's more than 20 years. So nowadays, China changed to a kind of national strategy in name of ecological civilization. But indeed, based on the rural revitalization, in the practice means that to change the government's investments from much towards the urbanization, then turn to down to the county level and lower than county level, mainly focus on the infrastructure construction in township and the village, even in the rural households. So that is similar as I think that you're from Korea. You're very clear to know that 1970s in Korea, you have a new countryside construction.
Yeah, new town construction. Yeah, right.
Something like that. But nowadays, there's a trillions Chinese yuan, Chinese infrastructure construction investments down to the local, to the countryside, and then encourage the urban people move to the countryside. Nowadays, more than 10 million citizens. Now they went to the countryside to join the rural reconstruction, to work with the local people, and then try to change this chemicalized production into the so-called ecological production. So many local things happen. So nowadays we are trying to do the global south comparative studies and try to not waiting for the mainstream change themselves, but we should do something ourselves to change ourselves. Okay, I just stop here. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a long story, but from the history of the China, and then you have experienced that rural communities kind of movement with the, I think it's the central government that led this kind of the re-infrastructuring the local areas. So I think that is kind of the movement between the government and also the local communities all together. And how about others? And then how about, okay, Jonathan raised your hand. Okay, you're second.
Thanks, sorry about that. So when I think about these issues, I work a bit in animal-centric issues, and in many ways, this kind of human exceptionalism, we could say a kind of human narcissism that sometimes dictates certain kinds of relationships, exploitative relationships with animals in the world. And so, given the state of affairs, I really think that when you're talking about social movements and tactics, is that we really have to look for a quiver of tactics, a quiver of arrows, because it doesn't seem that any one is kind of going to work enough on its own. And in recent years, and I'm talking more so in the United States and in Europe, and in many ways, I work with South Asians in the diaspora in these areas, in that you see a growth on the one hand of personal practices such as vegetarianism, veganism, and so on. And this seems to be one tactic that almost anyone can do and not really change their lives. You mentioned Extinction Rebellion and you have Animal Rebellion. And I really think direct action tactics, especially on the local level, but in large city centers, as Extinction Rebellion has done, is also quite crucial. The buy-in is big in those events because it takes a lot of risk, especially given government repression, government crackdown on advocates and activists. But this seems to be an absolutely necessary component to galvanize and inspire populations. I think you also need policy, and this is some of the harder long-term work where people are working on incremental change in animal agriculture and, say, agriculture more broadly speaking. There are some disagreements, it seems, about this kind of incremental approach versus full abolition approaches, but I think you can do both. I think the prison abolition movement has taught us that you can do a kind of two-track solution, which in the sense of working for incremental change, even while seeking, say, the end of say, industrial animal farming as an example. And then I really think, even though I think those, especially, given the devastations of capitalism and commercial capitalism, I think there is some resistance to embrace the ways in which new technologies, specifically for kind of animal lookalike products or plant-based products, have been received, because it seems to be yet another continuation of consumer capitalism. But I think the results kind of speak for themselves, and a lot of these individuals are working for the same ends. And so I think that this is kind of these 4 ways on a personal level one can engage in a vegan lifestyle on a much more personally involved angle. One can get involved in direct action and involved in organizing at the local level. I think if one wants to dedicate themselves to some of that really hard work of policy, it's absolutely essential. And then also these commercial enterprises, which seem to be changing more general mainstream currents around personal consumption, about accessibility, about availability. And I think the initial assumption that these are only kind of privileged choices that can be taken, say, by certain privileged individuals, not only is proving not to be the case, but in the populations that I work with, much of what's being pushed is very much closer to earlier ways of eating and more culturally aligned ways of eating and consuming. And I think someone mentioned earlier about this kind of rapaciousness of capitalism of consumption. And I think in South Asian traditions, but in so many, I think, spiritual and religious traditions, we can be engaged in these kind of boycotts. And I see something like veganism as a boycott, as opposed to boycotts like replacing one kind of stuff with another kind of stuff and feeling good about it. I think this movement towards degrowth is something that a lot of these traditions have to offer. So, I mean, in sum, I just think that social movements can have a multi-pronged approach. We see it happening, and we kind of need all the help we can get.
All right.
I
Thank
would
you.
like to jump in here and really take this conversation perhaps to a deeper level. Because if we are really going to have an ecological civilization, then we have to go beyond, as Professor Wen Tiejun said, we have to have new thinking. And I will back off a little bit to tell you a little bit about the new thinking that is beginning to gain some ground globally. And that is a partnership movement. Now, the 4 cornerstones that we really have to look at if we're going to have fundamental change. And I think everything that has been said is very much on the mark, but it doesn't go to the root problems. And so if we identify what are the people who are really pushing us back, focusing on, the people who are in denial about climate change. In the United States, they're also in denial about election results. Globally, they're in denial about COVID. I mean, you have it now, Professor Wen Tiejun. So what have they been focusing on? And they've been focusing on 4 cornerstones. And these are also the cornerstones identified by research that really have a profound effect, not only on how we relate to nature, but how we relate to one another. And I would suggest to you that they're interconnected, that we, as I said in my very short opening remarks, you cannot add harmony with nature to a fundamentally imbalanced system. So what are these 4 cornerstones? And I'm going to suggest to you that, remember I said new thinking. we have inherited old thinking that marginalizes or ignores the majority of humanity, women and children. Now, why is that so important? The first cornerstone happens to be childhood and family. We know from neuroscience, and I will repeat this because it bears understanding, it bears repeating. We know, we have long known it from psychology, but we today have the evidence from neuroscience that nothing less than the structure of our brains, and hence how we think, how we feel, how we vote, yes, how we relate to one another and to nature, are profoundly affected by what children experience in their first 5 years in particular. Although our brains can change, that is the good news. Our brains can change all through life, but as those of us who have gone through some kind of psychological process, we know how cumbersome and how lengthy that process is. So why not start from the beginning? So I would suggest to you that one of the most important social movements in the world today is moving from an authoritarian, rigidly male-dominated, highly punitive family to an authoritative, gender-balanced, and far mutually respectful family. We don't usually talk about this in environmental circles, and I think it is a very big mistake not to understand that that is what children observe, that is what they internalize. Now, fortunately, not everybody accepts that, but think for a moment, and I'm in the United States now, so I can speak about this terrible struggle that is going on in the United States right now between those dragging us back to more authoritarianism, strongman rule, violence, punitiveness, and yes, more fossil fuels and more pollution and everything else. They focus enormously in their, quote, social issues on family, for goodness sakes. We have to learn from them. The second cornerstone is gender. And again, we've been taught that like childhood, like family, that's an ancillary issue that, yeah, it's just a women's issue or maybe now a men's movement issue. It is a key social and economic organizing principle. We have inherited a gendered system of values which codes caring, caregiving, nonviolence, which we need in our world as it is today desperately, as feminine, as connected with women, and hence devalued. If we don't raise the status of women, as some of the Northern European nations have done, and they are not socialist, I mean, they are partnership-oriented, more caring societies. They have universal child care, they have, and pay child care workers well. You know, we think nothing of paying plumbers well, but child care workers to whom we entrust our children, I mean, it's a crazy system. But let's think about that for a moment. If we don't elevate caring for nature, which is in neither capitalist nor socialist theory, by the way, and move to what in my book, The Real Wealth of Nations, I call a caring economics of partnerism. The environmental movement, the ecological civilization is just a pipe dream. So I would say that the international women's movement and the international children's movements are hugely important. The third is economics. And I'm really, if you think at our system of economic rewards and our operating systems and how GDP and GNP classify caring for people, caring for nature outside of the market, right, as just reproductive rather than productive, which we inherited from both capitalist and socialist theory. And all of these cornerstones are related, by the way, okay? Then if we don't change the reward system, the economic reward system, and yes, give caring the support that it needs for nature, for children, for everybody, we really will be on the periphery. Somehow or other, the system will perpetuate itself. And that takes me to the last cornerstone, and that's story and language. Neuroscience debunks the old notion that we humans are inherently, rape and greed, and that all of these things are built into us. Moreover, so does archaeology, anthropology, even DNA studies. We have inherited false stories, which we need to correct. I don't want to take more time, really, but I just want to tell you, there are new findings now, for example, in the Americas, that the Native Americans, well, they weren't natives, they came from somewhere else, probably Africa, originally, they lived in harmony with nature. And yes, they were more partnership oriented. And my book, The Chalice and the Blade, which, as you know, has been translated into Chinese. And by the way, there is a book, because it's it's called The Chalice and the Blade in Chinese Culture, which is put together by Chinese scholars in English and in Chinese, showing these more partnership roots in China too. It's an amazing book, and I wish that you find it. But if not, at least find The Chalice and the Blade, which is available in Chinese, of course. We have to change our stories of what is valuable, what is human nature. Those, we have to start with those. So you may think, well, why not focus on the environment? You cannot just add harmony with nature unless the whole system shifts.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to
And how about Hian?
Yeah, I'd like to share shortly about current Korean grassroots movement in Korea, which is linked with idea of liberation and ecofeminism and a deep tradition of religious wisdom. The Korean churches call it, the current movement as Green Exodus movement, like the Hebrew slaves escaping Egyptian territory 1,000 years ago. We proceed in religious education, everyday life, social activity, and solidarity with outside people. There are a number of initiatives underway. So wide working of ecological theology and new interpretations of the Bible, religious formation of Green Faith and Green Church network. But for Korean Christians, the ecological crisis can be interpreted as the collapse of the belief in God of creation. So climate crisis is today's apocalypse, our time, the apocalypse of our time. I mean, there is a strong sense of limitations. This is because we live in these crises as both victims and victimizers. So reflections and repentance are ongoing in church's life, but more needed to be done to address people's anxiety, guilt, powerlessness. We need to go beyond, I would call, pragmatic impossibilism. It is near despair. We cannot do something for meaningful change. So we are trying to go beyond.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And everyone's talk is kind of related to the current challenges, inequality, and then like a rural community and the rich and the poor, and also the women and the marginal people, like children and the human rights. And those things are related to the way of our conception about the relationship between the human society and the nature. And then so it's more like current regime is more violent and then masculine types of development and economic development. But we are experiencing the huge grassroots social movement that is moving us toward more soft and the more balanced and more peaceful and more righteous or justice way of relationship between one another in the human society, and also between the nature and in the human beings. And so this actually reminds of me about the co-evolution process, which was suggested by the economist Nomads, and then also the Elinor Ostrom's social ecological systems, which is the same field of my study. And then because the core, the value and the organization, and also the power structure and the nature, I mean the environment, and all these things are interconnected. So some of you touched about the self or internal changes, which was the theme of yesterday's conversation. But somehow this kind of internal evaluation, or we value more the ones that we devaluated before, which is, I think, related to the current movement of system change. So how about Hiheon? Could you tell a little bit more about your way of thinking and then the cultural norms and values and practices that you're, experienced to be transformed to align with the sustainable living and ecological responsibility?
At this time, I'd like to speak about some revolutionary jump up from the religious idea to the social
Sure.
Politics. I think it is pretty clear that the capitalist system of production is operating now as a system of destruction for life on Earth. However, our society is still not free from the goal of increasing productivity. So the most government policies seem regressive in comparison with our current crisis, and social change movement also has self-limitations. However, we know the party is over. The party was at the table of fossil fuel prosperity. As a religious person, we now hope for religious poverty and voluntary poverty. There must be a link with the social transformation ideas. We hope for the rise of what French philosopher Bruno Latour called green class. I believe it is important to create some synchronized relationship between awareness and action. Solidarity for structural transformation is more important than small individual actions. More structural and deeper goal is needed for the actual change. I remember as the former Bolivian president Evo Morales said, capitalism is the worst enemy of all humanity. So movement for ecological justice and his imagination of the outside of capitalism. Green capitalism is impossible and seems disguising. We need to confront the empire of our time, capitalism. So we need some kind of new discourse of degrowth discourses. I'd like to develop that idea.
Yeah. Very strong word. I mean, there's no green capitalism. And how about Tiejun? I mean, the Professor Wen. Since you're economist, and then probably you think more technological advances or more investment toward the green industry, so-called green growth. Probably you might have a different thought about that, but I'm not sure. So how can you say this kind of technological advancements like a green investment and such in the renewable energy and circular economy models and smart infrastructure, which was based probably on the green capitalism, be leveraged to accelerate the transformation of society toward an ecological civilization?
Thank you for you emphasize the economic development with so-called cleaning energy. Especially when we talk about the global surplus. So-called global crisis is indeed come from the big surplus, not only industry, but also the finance. And we all know that the financial surplus is now the main problem of the so-called capitalism. When the leading country integrate their financial surplus into the physical production country, it means that they transfer the cost of the global financial surplus into this physical production country. Nowadays, the global surplus more and more like the 1929 to 1933 Western countries' economic crisis. We all know that such kind of crisis finally turned to the Second World War and then reformed the Cold War period in the world. So that is a long-term history. We must pay attention to nowadays the global surplus again to very much influence the whole of global economic development. So now in China, the central try the best to change this industrial surplus into the new energy, especially the clean energy, like hydropower and solar power and wind power and so and so, and try to reduce the traditional mine power and that is very important. But more important is that the country facing the challenge of the surplus, especially industrial surplus, and they are trying to change the direction from the industrialization into ecological civilization. The new strategy initiated since the year 2007. Nowadays, it's almost 18 years. And the most critical policy is to try to give the infrastructure and the infrastructure construction and the social construction from the central directly down to the local under the county level, and to make almost all of the village. You know that we have nowadays, we have 3 million natural villages in countryside. To make all of the village have so-called 5 construction. It's a pavement road, pipe water, and electricity, and the gas, and Wi-Fi. So when they made all of these big construction into the countryside, means that almost all the people in countryside, no matter you're rich or poor, you can have the equal rights to utilize, to use such kind of infrastructure. And it also means that large number of the people in city, they are somehow mainly from the middle class. They were easier to going down to the home village, or going down to the village that they like to be in, and then to merge to the local people. And they are, I mean, when you became a kind of middle class in the city, you're more keen on the green development, not like this very polluted development. So these are people, when they do have some ability to do something change by themselves, so they going down to the countryside to integrate it with the local people in countryside. So that is a kind of social movements automatically to change the economic development measures, not like traditional one. I mean, since the late 1990s, and China tried to accelerate industrialization, they more like to duplicate the Western model. But nowadays, people, especially the urban middle class and the rural people, they merge together, integrated together. So I just mentioned nowadays, we have thousands ecological farm run by this middle class in city, run by the young people. And then when they do whatever they want to do, they were easier to use this infrastructure construction. And then that means that the change come from the local, come from the people, come from the mass, not exactly come from the central power. And that is a so-called ecological civilization movements nowadays in China, both in urban and in the countryside. So this change, I think that will be more and more obviously. And when China Central invested into the countryside for this cleaning power, they gave this property rights. Nowadays originally controlled by the governments. Now they gave the property rights to the village to encourage the village reorganize the collectives. Means that these cooperatives nowadays merged into the countryside, from the countryside, and then joined by this middle class of the urban area. And then they can have a large number of the properties. And these are properties, if only controlled by the governments, that will be a lot of difficulties in the local. But when you give these properties, give the rights to the local people, you mean that it means that the local people can have a kind of position to negotiate with this outside capital. When the capital want to invest into the countryside, they if you just facing these scattered small households, they have no power, they have no rights to negotiate. That even will be the worst situation. But now when they do have some properties, elevated collective, they have at least several million, even 30 to 50 million Chinese yuan as physical properties. And then every year they still can have a lot of investments as cash to invest into the village. So it means that they have physical properties, they also have a cash properties, and then they will reorganize as a kind of collective, and then they will have their position to negotiate with the outside capital investors. So that means the whole of the economic base, the infrastructure, economic infrastructure nowadays change step by step. Okay, I just
All right. Thank you. Yeah, it's impressive to learn about the natural village and then the local people's new kind of development in the local areas. And how about Jonathan? You mentioned a little bit about the social entrepreneurship before, and then I think maybe you're not. How can you materialize this kind of entrepreneurship contribute to the transformation of society toward sustainable living?
Thank you. So I might take the notion of social entrepreneurship and maybe social innovation more in the direction of the way in which we organize ourselves individually as in communities. I spoke a little bit more about things like policy and technology and food technologies. And I just wanted to echo for a moment the previous comments about really the insistence on degrowth, and that growth really it's worse than a road to nowhere, right? It's not just a road to nowhere, it's a road to collapse with so many harmed in its wake. And I think that critiques of capitalism are sometimes viewed as sometimes just economic critiques. However, and echoing a little bit what Riane said earlier, is that there are so many gendered, racial, ability, class components to the internalization of a capitalist mindset that is quite insidious. Which is to say, for example, is that when we look out onto the natural world as use things for humans and organize ourselves as such, we are isolated into individual, typically cis, het, monomarital situations, in which consumption is very much, and living is this isolated practice. And the form of gender, you could say even exploitation, is the notion that the kind of value of women in this situation is for reproductive labor, the reproduction of laborers, the reproduction of consumers. And in many ways, the superior mode of being in this system is a male, able-bodied, wealthy, and often in certain contexts, I'm speaking in the racial capitalist history of the United States, white, and also human. Right. So in many ways, I really feel like there needs to be ways in which you're organizing yourselves, or we are organizing ourselves on levels that do not perpetuate this mode of production, consumption, reproduction, reconsumption. And so on the level of social innovation, I think there are ways in which individuals can join cooperatives, create cooperatives, live communally, adopt ways of existing in the world that are slight gestures of resistance and gestures of subversion that don't necessarily just repeat paradigms that are taking us off a cliff and fast. And earlier, one of the other speakers said how this is not just an external going off the cliff, it's also an internal going off the cliff. And I think that's from my field where I'm studying South Asian traditions, you quickly learn. My students quickly learn that the problem is thirst, over thirsting, over desire, because it's not necessarily leading to a production of happiness. And yet we seem to think that the most successful people under the capitalist system are the ones who have the means to satisfy whatever desires they have. And actually, the more frivolous desires you can satisfy, seemingly the more successful you're thought of. The idea that you have that much income at your disposal. So I think on the individual level, and this is, why I'm saying it's a kind of a different take on entrepreneurship, it's how much can we disrupt typical patterns of work, of travel, of living, of production and consumption, so that in fact, we're not just all looking for the same house, the same property, the same type of car, and kind of shirking individual responsibilities. Which is not to say that this is all shouldered by the individual. It's kind of what I was saying earlier, kind of two-track approach. But I really think that to catalyze internal changes, ecological changes, the way we view non-humans, animals, and non-animals even, it's in practice. It's a praxis. It's not simply a reflection. And it's through our gestures and through our behaviors and interrelations, we reform who we are, and in many ways shed some desires that we've just been encultured into. So I think other than the more obvious ways of exercising innovation and entrepreneurship in a financial way or in some political way, I really think that the ways that radicals, people we've categorized as radicals, have organized themselves for decades, if not centuries, really have been powerful. And why you see this community still existing and a revival of these kind of communities.
All right. Thank you. And yeah, we're going back to the internal change again. But how about Riane? How can you education and media especially play a role in shaping public narratives and values, which is contributing to the transformation of society in terms of our social movement? And how do you think this education and media actually play in the sense of ecological civilization with the social movement?
Well, I think that we need to have much more impact on what our education and what our social and other media communicate. As I said, we've been taught very false stories, and we need education to correct that. Unfortunately, the academy moves at a very, very slow pace, and so does education. So I really think that it's up to you and to me and to others like ourselves to bring out different stories. And I really, because I think we're running out of time here, I want to make the point that if we are going to really build an ecological civilization, a partnership civilization, we have to first of all recognize this gendered system of values. Because if we don't give value to caring for nature and value to caring for people, value to having a, value to caring for our environment, whether it's our individual home as women's work, or as all of us are trying here to care for nature. If caring continues to be devalued, then we really are not going to change the system. The awareness of something that is an obstacle is not coincidental. For example, that part of the people pushing us way back to what I call domination systems, really, as part of their social issues, have all of these gendered issues, right? I mean, rigid gender stereotypes, you can't be in between. Ranking men over women, the masculine over the feminine. This is not coincidental. And I think we have to understand that they're dealing with some of the cornerstones of systems. I think we have to recognize that caring for people and caring for children and caring for nature are interconnected. And that is really the most important human work, whether it's done by women or men or anybody in between. And yes, we have to really take a very close look at our system of social rewards. And I cannot emphasize that, particularly economic rewards, because we have to make sure that the work of caring is, for people and nature, is well rewarded, not in just rhetoric, but in ways that put food on the table and a roof over people's heads. And really, if we don't do this, we're just shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic, I think, because the system will keep reproducing itself. And
All
we
right.
can't do that.
All right, thanks. We actually we are running out of time, and then Jonathan said he has to leave. So as a last question, I'd like to ask, what are the most effective strategies for us to raise public awareness? And then I know there's the longest distinction in the world is between the brain and the heart, but how to scale up to create meaningful societal change from the internal or the personal change. Jonathan, can you tell us as your last remarks?
Yes, thanks. I'm sorry that I have to leave a bit early. And this is the hardest question. This kind of question between principles and strategy, philosophy and strategy, and often we talk about this a lot. What's theory? As Fred Hampton used to say, theory without practice is nothing. And there seems to be a luxury of those that can sit around to think about kind of all these internal changes in a way and hoping for the best. But in the field I work in, I don't know, over 80 billion land animals were killed last year for food. In the United States, over 300 chickens are killed every second for food. How much time do we have? And I'm not even saying that one has to take a specific perspective, but it means that there are lives in the balance today, every moment. And so I think that in a sense, raising awareness is always good, but what happens once that awareness is raised? And so in many ways, this is why individuals are involved in direct advocacy, direct action. I think we have to be more robust and outspoken in our own communities, even at the way of ruffling feathers. So I'm just saying that on the kind of not even the local level here, this is almost the familial level. But in terms of the most effective strategies, I think the way that we engage individuals is extremely important, because being right is very different than getting what's right or getting what's necessary. Earlier, I mentioned a kind of multi-pronged approach of personal transformation through personal change through personal consumption patterns. I think one can be involved in literally or community organizing, street work, as it were, policy, law, and then eventually perhaps even involved in technological advancements. I say that while at the same time I started off saying that there's a kind of a bit of a rub, because I don't think capitalism is ending this situation, but just saying dismantle capitalism over and over doesn't seem to do much work either. So as Eric Olin Wright used to say, there's stages of this, and one is the erosion of that system. And so I think any techniques that work on slowly chipping away and eroding and using our strengths, I think this is probably the last thing I would say, is that strategies are undertaken by individuals, and we can't form fit strategies to individuals. So I think it's really important to understand, to capitalize on our strengths and the strengths of those who want to be involved, and know that some will be involved more in some areas and some in other areas. And because without passion, the kind of that resistance doesn't continue. So there has to be a continued passion for it. And so I think among those 4, you could say 5 even strategies, as long as you could use that kind of passion and continue, then we might see some form of change. I can't say I'm the most optimistic. I would wish I was much more optimistic in this respect, but resistance is what we have.
Right, that's true. And yeah, we because we don't have enough time to discuss more deeply, but could you all say about your idea about how can collaboration and partnership between different sectors and different communities, which include civil society and government and academia and business, to be fostered to facilitate this transformation of society toward ecological civilization. As your last remarks, because we have to wrap up after this, so please tell us your last thought about this thing. Who would like to first? And Professor Wen, do you want to make a comment
I
about
think
the
that
collaboration?
when we all facing the collapse of the globalization, that is a big crisis in the world. So the first we need everybody think about and how to protect yourself and your family and your friends and your community from such kind of global crisis. And the first, I suppose that people need to know something about such kind of global crisis. And then you may try to do something. I mean, some family, if you do have their home village, try to go back, do something with your villagers, with your focus. And then you may at least set up a little base for you and your family, prevent yourself and your family from such kind of a global crisis. That is the first. Second, try to empower the local organization. No matter it's a female association or a performance teams or aging people's association, whatever, just try to emphasize the people organize themselves. And by organization, by people self-organization, you can have a self-empowerment and then pay attention to your own safety. That will be the most critical issue nowadays. Thank you.
All right. Well, that's a little scary. You mentioned about the global crisis, which will be coming, I guess, in a few, less than a decade, I think, for the climate crisis. And this also reminds me about the Holling's adaptive cycle. You know, the one regime, the one paradigm actually goes to growth, and then sometimes it's a conservation, and then collapse, and then reorganize. And so we is kind of in the middle of that kind of process right now. And then your thoughts about and thoughts and ideas about this kind of movement, and also the changes that we are going to face, is kind of we never experienced before. So I think we have to get ready about this kind of things. And before kind of a big crisis, we have to collaborate to overcome this kind of challenges. So how about Hian? Do you have additional ideas about the collaboration between the sectors, or any kind of things to overcome this kind of a crisis?
My last remark is the religious imagination of eschatology. Our famous concept of sustainability tends to, for me, slow down the social transformation. And so the concept is not enough for us. I'd like to speak of unsustainability, the radical stop for galvanizing the awareness about this crisis. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thanks. How about Riane? I know you have a lot of things to say, but we only have a few minutes. But so, yeah, please tell us.
Well, I tell you, I think that I just want to emphasize that if you look at the people who want to hang on to the fossil fuels, they also want as a group to hang on to traditions of domination in both the family and the state. Then you come back to the four cornerstones, because we have all these social movements and we've had them in the times of disequilibrium. And now we are in a time of tremendous disequilibrium as we shift from a primarily industrial civilization to a post-industrial one. And I think that the four cornerstones, and I can only recommend really the book that came out with Oxford University Press in 2019, Nurturing Our Humanity, which details why, from a scientific standpoint, from a sociological perspective, and from an ecological perspective, and from a historical perspective, if we want to build a society that is more of an ecological civilization, we have to pay attention to the foundations on which the kind of system that is taking us to an evolutionary dead end at our level of technology and population is built. And it's these four cornerstones of childhood and family, gender, economics, and story and language. And as for this just being theory, it is being put into practice by the people pushing us back, who have a very integrated social, political, and family agenda and gender agenda. And we have to learn from them. So that would be my strategy and my strategic recommendation. Keep doing whatever you're doing, but pay attention to the whole system, because the foundations are the foundations on which these malfunctioning systems keep rebuilding themselves, whether it's in religious form or secular form or totalitarian form, or Eastern or Western or Northern or Southern, it doesn't matter.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments and remarks. And I think as a conclusion of our session, I think the most important thing is from our internal change or awareness to social engagement, and also get ready to a radical change, which will be coming over anyway. So to do so, to do it, and then we have to build and share stories and put every ideas into practice, and which is started from the personal level to the social level, and then we have to integrate all these kind of different levels of trials. So I think that is kind of the fundamental change toward the ecological civilization, and also the transforming our society. How about that? I'm not sure you audience have more questions, but probably we don't have enough time to share that kind of that questions. So in the later hours group discussion, probably we can deal with that kind of questions. Andrew, I like to okay. Andrew,
Great.
yeah, you have to finish the things, right?
I'll transition us out. Thank you so much, Sukhyun, and all of our panelists for that really wonderful and insightful conversation on a really big and important topic. So I think we covered a lot of ground, but we also set up the stage for even continuing deeper conversation in our small groups to come. So thank you all. It was wonderful. Before we have a short break, we actually get to incorporate some beauty and creativity through music into our conversation. So all of these great thinking that we're doing can also now be integrated with some musical experience. In May, June, if you're around, would you be willing to do a little introduction in context to explain the piece that we're about to listen to?
Andrew, could you just play it first? So
Sure.
then I will ask Vivian Shung to give some short introduction, and the one of the member is here. Maybe he would like to say a few words after that.
Perfect. That's fantastic.
Wonderful.
Then here we go. Let's listen in.
从我的了解来说，蓝草音乐是美国的一种传统音乐，但是它到了这块大陆，东方这块大陆以后，它会跟本地的文化进行一个融合、演变。我相信这个蓝草音乐将来在中国生根发芽以后，它会开出不一样的花。
When I first arrived to China, I had a backpack, a little suitcase, and a mandolin because I needed to keep my calluses thick. I had no friends, I had no family. In a way, it was terrifying, but at the same time, it was completely freeing because no one's going to tell you what to do because they're all on the other side of the world. At the time, Beijing's music scene, particularly the underground music scene, was amazing. It had tons of really cool underground rock and folk rock venues, and I was really into folk rock bands like Hangai or Xiaohe, experimental kind of stuff. So from there, naturally, it turned into meeting with other people who liked old time and bluegrass regularly, performing, touring all over the country, playing the music. So I found a home by leaving home, by learning Chinese music, which led me to bluegrass music, which led me right back home.
我是从小学习音乐，基本上有空会有4、5个小时就多练习。其实，在音乐学院学的大部分都是一些，就是演奏技巧啊和一些理论啊什么。然后我们蓝草音乐其实音乐学院学不到， 以前我只是听，比如像我喜欢的那个 Bella Black， 很早之前我就见过他演出。但蓝草音乐，大家在一起，比如喝茶，一起演奏，就会更开心。我们是一次偶然的演出，然后我们大家都觉得，合作的挺好，然后也比较性格上也比较投缘，然后就决定一起排练，然后一起研究，正好大家都比较喜欢蓝草音乐，就这样走在一起。
我们这个乐队呢叫游牧者，游牧其实就是他不断去寻找价值，这个价值也许是给牲畜的一些这个随草丰美的地方，他在那边适合生存，也许是找到朋友，他有好东西交换。现在我们是找到朋友以后，我们就一起交换思想，交换不同的文化的一种理念，然后一同创造。你如果不分享是没有意义的。像美国音乐家或者美国这种民间音乐，它的这种乐观的心态，这种蓝草音乐的节奏也好，或者它的和声，它和声呢相对来说比较简单，但是呢都非常的精准。开心的时候，快乐的时候结束，回味无穷。所以说希望能把这个跟我们中国本土的一些传统音乐，或者说我们自己创作的一些音乐，能做这些尝试，做一些这方面的尝试。现在玩的蓝草音乐就是说，它是一种 acoustic music， 就是原声音乐，不需要插电。所以我需要我们的生活可能有时候也需要 unplug， 就是说暂时脱离一下这种特别现代的生活，我们回归一下。
Hi, Vivian, are you here now?
Yes. Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
It's my great honor to be here and introduce my dear friend, Jerry. I think he's here online. And Andrew, if you could open his Mac, he will be here and share. And I just want to very briefly say how happy I am to have him here at this conference, and especially his team, the Nomads, is a perfect musical and artistic collaboration between China and the US. I think 4 band members, half of them from China, half of them from the US. Yes, and Jerry is here. I will leave the stage to him. Hi, Jerry. And feel free to speak Chinese as you wish.
心灵，
哎，
现在说话吗？
可以的，可以的。
OK，能看见我吧？能看见是吧？大家好，我是游牧者乐队的赛夫，我来自内蒙古，现在是在上海，居住在上海。我们乐队呢是2014年成立于上海，乐队成员是2个美国人，2个中国人。我们主要是这个乐队的风格是融合了蓝草和一些乡村音乐，还有这个本土的民间音乐，还有世界各地的这种根源音乐。主要就是一个游牧的理念，我觉得跟我们乐队特别契合，就是它这种天人合一的这种生活方式。但是呢，现在这种方式呢，其实在草原上也不多见了啊。我们主要是一种文化和精神上的这种借鉴啊，可以把这种文明和这种文化进行一个串联。然后呢，游牧呢，它也是跟自然、跟这个大自然进行的一个这种平衡。我觉得跟我们这个大会的这个宗旨还是有一些契合。 希望通过我们的音乐能那个把传递友谊、分享价值，然后呢，也希望大家能更加关注环保，让我们这个地球更加美丽，让我们的家园更加美好。谢谢，谢谢心灵。
Thank you. Thank you, Saiful. And maybe a little preview that I know you and your brand might be coming to the States this year to perform. And this will be a wonderful opportunity to also have our US friends,
we hope
maybe
so,
more collaboration. Yeah, great. Thank you. Andrew, back to you.
Wonderful. You know, if you make it over to the US, I'm sure our friends in Arkansas, Jay McDaniel, who's one of our community's bluegrass musicians, I think he would love to host you and have you. Oh yeah, he's got his guitar. I see him now. He's getting ready to play a song. All right, so it's so wonderful to have you. Thank you for joining us. We're gonna take some time to let all of this wonderfulness sink in. So we'll go for about a 15-minute break. And then we'll come back and we'll finish out in our small group conversations. So we'll see you soon.